If you want a true masterclass in risk-taking, strategic brilliance, and just the sheer power of allies working together.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to take you back to a single day in Bavaria, August 13th, 1704.
The Battle of Blenheim.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into Blenheim. And you have to understand, for what, half a century, the French military under Louis XIV was the undisputed heavyweight champion of Europe.
They were. They just didn't lose big battles. Their entire military machine seemed, well, invincible.
Right.
And that's really the crucial context here, because Blenheim wasn't just a win for the other side. It was the first catastrophic field defeat the French had suffered in 50 years.
So our mission today is to figure out how that happened, and more importantly, what was hanging in the balance? What made the Allies take this enormous gamble so far from home?
The stakes were just astronomical. We're right in the middle of the War of the Spanish Succession.
And it sounds so academic, War of the Spanish Succession.
Right, who gets a throne? But the real fear across Europe was about preventing a union of the French and Spanish crowns.
Because if Louis XIV manages to put his grandson on the Spanish throne and then unite those two huge empires,
France becomes a superpower with no counterweight. I mean, an overwhelming continental hegemony. It changes everything.
So the crisis point in 1704 is that Louis XIV's forces, with his Bavarian allies, are literally marching toward Vienna,
the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. And if Vienna falls, the whole Grand Alliance, that's England, the Dutch Republic, the Empire, it all likely just shatters.
So to stop this, the English commander, the Duke of Marlborough, he makes a decision that, at the time, people thought it was insane.
Completely. He decides to undertake this lightning-fast 250-mile march from the Low Countries all the way south toward the Danube River.
It was a strategic feint, really, wasn't it? Disguised as a logistical miracle.
It was. And he kept his destination secret, even from his own allies, until the absolute last moment. He was covering ground faster than anyone thought possible.
All to reinforce the imperial forces.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when the dust finally settles from that march, you have the Allies with this formidable force, led by two of the era's most brilliant minds, Marlborough himself and the Austrian general, Prince Eugene of Savoy.
A legendary combination. They had a combined force of about 52,000 men.
And they were up against a slightly larger Franco-Bavarian army, about 56,000 men under Marshals Tallard and Marcin.
And they finally meet near the small village of Blenheim, or as we know it, Blenheim, right there on the Danube.
Okay, let's get into the tactics, because this is what really defines the genius of the whole thing. Marlborough is facing this strong French line stretched along the Nabel River. Why not just hammer the flanks?
Well, the French commanders, they had the advantage of position. They were on high ground, and they were using the villages, especially Blenheim, as these defensive strong points.
So attacking the center, which was protected by marshy ground, seems counterintuitive. It looked impenetrable.
It did. But Marlborough spotted a critical flaw in Marshal Tallard's deployment. This is fascinating. Tallard was so confident in his flanks, he made a fatal error.
Which was?
He overcommitted his best infantry, 27 battalions of them, into the village of Blenheim on his right flank.
So he stuffed his best troops into a defensive box.
Exactly. And crucially, he didn't hold enough reserves back in the center. He'd weakened the very link that held his whole line together.
And Marlborough saw that opening.
He realized that if he could just get enough troops across that marshy Nebel River, even in small groups, to pin those forces down in Blenheim,
and keep Marcin busy on the other flank,
he could deliver the hammer blow right through the now stretched thin French center. The whole battle hinged on that river crossing.
But that crossing must have been a nightmare. You've got men wading through water under constant fire, trying to reorganize.
Oh, it's brutal. Incredibly costly. He sent his infantry across first, and they took heavy losses, but they established these crucial bridgeheads.
It all comes down to timing then.
Perfect timing. While the French were distracted fighting Prince Eugene's forces on one side, and Marlborough's infantry were tying down Tallard's troops in Blenheim village.
He was secretly massing his cavalry.
His entire cavalry reserve right in the newly secured center. He softens them up with infantry, draws their attention to the flanks, and then boom!
The massive cavalry charge.
That's the masterstroke. He unleashes 8,000 horsemen directly through the breach he'd created. This wasn't just a charge, it was a massed, coordinated penetration that just rolled up what was left in the French center.
It effectively cut Tallard's army in two.
Completely severed. The moment the French line was split, the battlefield just descended into chaos. Tallard couldn't even communicate with Marsan's forces anymore.
And that separation led to an instant collapse of the French right wing. It totally isolated those 27 battalions Tallard had so confidently packed into Blenheim.
They were completely surrounded, command structure gone, the center shattered. Those 14,000 men, some of the best infantry in Europe, they had nowhere to go. They fought desperately, but
They were forced to surrender.
the entire wing, that transition from a pitched battle to just utter collapse, that's what made Blenheim so unique.
The sheer scale of the loss is hard to wrap your head around. Let's look at the numbers again. Over 20,000 French casualties, killed or wounded. But that detail, the 14,000 captured men, that's not just a loss. That is the annihilation of a huge professional fighting force in a single afternoon.
And the symbolic loss was maybe even bigger. Marshal Tallard himself, one of Louis XIV's most trusted commanders, was captured personally.
They put him on a coach and just shipped him off to England as a prisoner of war.
All the way to London. Imagine the shockwaves that sent through Versailles.
I can't. I mean, for a general of that stature to be defeated is one thing, but captured. Was there any precedent for that? Not at this level of strategic importance. Not after decades of French military dominance. The capture of Tallard sent a single devastating message across Europe. The Sun King's army was not only beatable, its leadership could be humiliated. Which brings us to the immediate geopolitical consequences. What did this victory actually secure?
Well, the ripple effects were immediate, and they were massive. First, Bavaria was knocked out of the war right away. They signed a treaty, withdrew their support for Louis XIV.
Securing the imperial flank.
Second, Vienna was safe. The threat to the Habsburg heartland was just gone. But most critically, the victory completely ended Louis XIV's hopes for a swift, decisive win.
It's not just that the war would drag on, is it? It's that France totally lost the initiative.
They did. They had been on the offensive, dictating everything. Blenheim forced them into a defensive posture. The whole focus shifted from attacking Austria to scrambling to defend their own borders.
And that shattered the myth of French invincibility.
A myth they had carefully built for 50 years. And when other powers realized the French could be beaten so badly, it emboldened the whole Grand Alliance.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this one battle really solidified the political architecture of the alliance itself, right? Because alliances are fragile.
Nothing unites a coalition like a shared, spectacular victory. Blenheim cemented the Grand Alliance. It proved that Marlborough and Eugene could work together, which was a genuine feat of command, and that their strategy worked.
Success breeds commitment.
It guarantees that the political will and the money will keep flowing from London, Vienna, and The Hague to keep prosecuting the war.
And for Marlborough, I mean, this secured his legacy forever. He became not just a successful commander, but a truly historic figure.
Absolutely. Blenheim didn't just win him fame, it irrevocably secured his position as Britain's premier general. It allowed the Allies to transition from defense to offense. They could now take the fight directly to France.
Something that was unthinkable just a year earlier.
Sure.
And Queen Anne made sure that legacy was literally set in stone.
Indeed. As a direct reward for saving the empire and bringing this unprecedented glory to England, the Queen granted Marlborough the royal manor of Woodstock.
And the funds to build Blenheim Palace.
Massive funds. That sprawling, magnificent palace was explicitly built as a permanent physical monument to commemorate that single day of battle.
It's an incredible piece of historical memory, still standing today. It seems like Blenheim also raised Britain's profile as a major continental military power.
It absolutely did. It signaled that Britain wasn't just a naval power, some peripheral island nation anymore. Its armies and its generals were capable of decisive action in the heart of Europe.
Fundamentally altering the balance of power for the next century.
Blenheim was the pivotal moment. It proved the alliance could win, and it cemented the entire course of the war.
It's just amazing to think that one day's tactical brilliance could not only shatter a nation's myth of invincibility, but also lead to the creation of one of Europe's most famous palaces.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the long-term function of a monument like Blenheim Palace.
Right. It's not just a house.
It's a constant visible reminder of a single decision made in the heat of battle. So what does the continued existence of that palace tell us today about the relationship between military success and historical memory? Does a physical monument make history more concrete? Or just more visible to future generations who might forget the desperate stakes that made it necessary in the first place. It's something for you to ponder.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are heading back to the very start of the 18th century. We're going to unpack a conflict that, on the surface, looks like a big family fight over a crown.
It really does.
But when you look closer, this was actually one of the first, well, truly, global wars. A huge, sprawling crisis that didn't just redraw the map of Europe, it completely rewrote the rules of global power.
That's right.
So our mission in this deep dive is to look at our sources and figure out how the death of one single childless king in Spain could just instantly blow up into the War of the Spanish Succession, a war that really defined the next 100 years.
And you have to understand the scale here. The name of the war is a bit misleading. This wasn't just about, who gets to wear the crown.
Right.
This was about preserving the European balance of power, a balance that was instantly, and I mean instantly, threatened by this one king's decision about who would come after him. It wasn't about royalty so much as preventing one family from controlling way too much of the world.
Okay, let's get right into that trigger. Let's start with the man who kicks this whole thing off. Charles II of Spain. He dies in 1700.
And he was famously frail. People called him Charles the Bewitched.
Yeah, and crucially, he's the last of the Spanish Habsburgs. So when he dies, he leaves this giant gaping hole at the center of an empire that literally spanned the globe.
And the size of that prize is what made it a global problem. We're not just talking about Spain.
No.
The Spanish crown controlled huge colonies overseas, the Silver Roots, the Kingdom of Naples, Milan, and the Spanish Netherlands, which is basically modern Belgium and Luxembourg. It was massive.
So the whole continent is just holding its breath. Everyone kind of expects the empire to be carved up, right? Divided between the other big royal houses, the French Bourbons, the Austrian Habsburgs, just to keep the peace.
That was the logical move.
So why did that completely fail to happen?
Because Charles II, in a move that sent just a profound shockwave through Europe, decided to offer the entire Spanish Empire.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. No division, no conditions. He offered it all to one single person, Philip, the Duke of Anjou. And our sources all point to this as the moment the fuse was lit.
And Philip was, he was no ordinary choice.
Not at all.
He was the grandson of the Sun King himself, Louis XIV of France. It's the ultimate power play. You're basically saying, let's join the two strongest powers in Europe.
Exactly. And that was the core fear. The thing that brought every other power together was this image of a consolidated Franco-Spanish superpower.
A megastate.
A megastate. Louis XIV already had the most powerful army in Europe. If he suddenly gets control of Spain's wealth and its global territories, he creates something that no one else could ever hope to challenge. It would end the game.
So the war that followed, this 13-year-long war, it wasn't really about who should be king. It was a desperate, incredibly expensive military effort to stop that from happening.
A preventative war.
A preventative war to stop one combined power from controlling, most of Western Europe and its trade.
And when you look at who joined which side, it's all based on that one strategic interest. On one side, you have France, Louis XIV. His goal is simple. Get his grandson, Philip, on that Spanish throne and, expand French influence everywhere.
And on the other side,
the opposition, the Grand Alliance, they called it. And this was built specifically to stop him. It was mainly England, which would soon become Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire, which was led by the Austrian Habsburgs.
And the Habsburgs are key here.
Oh, absolutely. The Austrian branch felt they had the better claim to the throne anyway.
Yeah.
So they put forward their own guy.
Archduke Charles.
Archduke Charles, exactly.
Yeah.
The alliance's whole strategy was, okay, let's install Charles as king, and then we divide the empire. Give the non-Spanish parts, like the Netherlands and Italy, to Austria, and that way, the balance of power is preserved.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because our sources just hammer this point home. This wasn't just about kings and armies. There's a massive commercial angle to this.
A huge one. The war wasn't just about who sat in Madrid. It was about who controlled the trade routes, who controlled the money coming out of the New World.
So for the Grand Alliance, for Britain and the Dutch especially, okay, yes, stop France. But the deeper goal was...
It was economic. It was about securing trading privileges in the Spanish markets, especially in the Americas.
We have to get specific here, because what kind of privilege is worth funding more than a decade of war for?
That would be the asiento.
The asiento.
This was the exclusive official contract from the Spanish crown to supply enslaved Africans to the Spanish colonies. It was an incredibly lucrative monopoly.
Wow.
For the British, Getting the asiento meant getting a huge guaranteed foothold inside the closed Spanish colonial system. It was a way to make a fortune and undermine French and Spanish power at the same time. It was a license to print money.
That makes the stakes so much clearer. So the fighting wasn't just about territory. It was about forcing the Spanish to give up these commercial monopolies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that mix of dynasty and commerce is why the sources call this one of the first truly global conflicts. It was fought in Europe, yes, but also in the Americas, in India, on the high seas.
And the Grand Alliance had some pretty incredible military successes.
Colossal achievements.
Yeah.
The Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy, they really show that a coalition could beat the French army, which everyone thought was invincible.
The Battle of Blenheim in 1704.
Blenheim is a perfect example. It saved Vienna, and it basically forced Louis XIV to realize this wasn't going to be a quick win. This was a fight for his kingdom's survival.
And what about the smaller players? You see regional powers like Savoy in Italy just looking to profit from the chaos.
Of course. Everyone's trying to get a piece. Savoy strategically flipped sides to join the alliance because they wanted territory for themselves. They had their eye on the Duchy of Milan, maybe even Sicily. It was like an open season on the Spanish Empire's assets.
So after, 13 brutal years, everyone is exhausted?
Financially exhausted, militarily stalemated. So the diplomats finally sit down at Utrecht in 1713 to draw the new map of Europe.
So how did the Treaty of Utrecht end this whole thing? Did the alliance get what they wanted? Was it a total victory?
It was a massive compromise.
Yeah.
But a very, very effective one because it achieved the main goal, preserving that balance of power. It did two major things.
Okay.
First, it legally and permanently separated the French and Spanish crowns. Philip V, Louis's grandson, he actually got to stay King of Spain.
So a win for the Bourbons.
A huge dynastic win. But, and this is the crucial part, he had to forfeit any and all claim to the throne of France for himself and all his descendants. That nightmare scenario of a unified superstate was taken off the table for good.
So the core threat was gone. But what about the second outcome? You said it sets up the British Empire for the next century. What did Britain get out of this?
Britain walked away with monumental gains. Territorially, they got Gibraltar and Minorca.
Which gives them control of the Mediterranean.
Complete control over the entrance to the Mediterranean. A vital strategic choke point. The Royal Navy suddenly owns that sea lane.
An enormous asset. And on the commercial side, did they get the prize?
They absolutely did. Britain was granted the asiento, that exclusive slave trading contract for Spanish America, for 30 years. Plus, they got to send one trading ship a year into those restricted Spanish-American ports.
Wow.
Those two clauses were really the economic engine for Britain's rise in the 18th century, and it was paid for directly by their military success in this war.
So if you look at the map after Utrecht, the Spanish Empire is basically dismantled in Europe for the sake of stability.
That's a perfect way to put it. Spain loses its European territories. The Austrian Habsburgs get the Spanish Netherlands, Naples, Sardinia. The Bourbons get the Spanish crown, but the empire itself is surgically divided to stop it from being a threat.
So the big lesson is that geopolitical stability, at least at this point in history, was achieved by breaking up an empire, not by one side winning outright.
Exactly. The war was a harsh lesson that stability often requires the division of power, rather than letting it all fall into one set of hands. And the gains Britain made, they marked a clear, undeniable shift in global power.
It really feels like this is the moment where commercial interests, trade in the Americas, became a central reason for a massive European war.
It absolutely is. It moves trade policy from something that happens in the background to the absolute forefront of foreign policy and military strategy. It's now a reason to go to war.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a thought for you to consider. When modern bodies, like the World Trade Organization, debate things like fair trade and market access, how much of that framework, which is designed to ensure a competitive balance and contain any single dominant economic power, can trace its roots back to a treaty like Utrecht, signed over 300 years ago to solve a very similar problem?
A fascinating question.
Think about that historical momentum, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for a really high-stakes moment in military history.
A big one?
The Battle of Blenheim, 1704. And, if you just glance at the history books, this wasn't just another win. It was a fundamental power shift.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is right in the middle of the War of the Spanish Succession, and the stakes were just immense.
It prevented the Bourbon domination of Europe, right? It secured the whole Danube Valley.
Exactly. And the standard analysis, it always focuses on the final cavalry charge or the collapse of the French line. But our mission today is, well, it's a bit deeper.
Right.
We want to unpack the tactical synergy between the two commanders, the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy.
Because the sources are pretty clear on this. The Allied success hinged entirely on them.
It did. It wasn't just them fighting side by side. It was careful planning, a shared vision, and the execution of these really complementary roles. A perfectly synchronized attack.
I think synchronized is the key word there.
Yeah.
Because the other side, the combined Franco-Bavarian army,
under Tallard and Marsin.
yeah, and the Elector of Bavaria, they had a strong position. I mean, if the Allies had attacked disjointedly, they would have just been rolled up.
No question. This was never about superior numbers. It was all about superior coordination.
It was. And the coordination, it started with what the sources call the strategic blueprint.
Mm-hmm. They didn't just stumble into this. Days before the battle, Marlborough and Eugene met, and they finalized a plan that was essentially a choreographed division of labor.
Okay, so let's get into that division of the field, because that really is the foundation for everything that follows. What was the core strategic split they agreed on?
Well, they looked at the landscape, which was, basically split by this small marshy river, the Nibel.
Right.
And they realized they couldn't just fight as one big unit against that long enemy line. So they carved the enemy into two distinct problems. Marlborough took the main Allied force on the left.
And his target was Marshal Tallard's army, which was anchored around the village of Blenheim itself, wasn't it?
Precisely. Marlborough's assignment was the main offensive, the main thrust. His role was, the glory target, the decisive blow.
So he was tasked with getting across that river, breaking the French center, and then, capturing the forces stuck in Blenheim?
That was the plan, forcing their surrender.
So if Marlborough had the main striking force, what did that leave for Prince Eugene over on the right flank?
Eugene's assignment was, it was fundamentally different, and you could argue it was the much harder strategic choice.
How so?
He had to engage the combined forces of the Elector of Bavaria and Marshal Marsin, a really strong, well-positioned enemy. But his mission wasn't to break through.
No.
His mission was to fix them in place.
Fixing, okay, that's a very specific military term. So for anyone listening, what does it actually mean to fix an enemy army like this?
It means you engage them with such unrelenting pressure and intensity that they are strategically paralyzed. They just can't move.
They're stuck.
Completely stuck. They can't spare a single reserve soldier, and this is the crucial part, they cannot send anyone to reinforce any other part of the battlefield.
Because they have to believe the real threat is right in front of them.
That's the goal. Eugene had to make the Elector and Marsin believe they were facing an immediate existential threat. Make them commit every single resource to their own little part of the fight.
That makes that distinction, fixing versus striking, so critical. We always celebrate the hammer, the decisive blow. But this victory depended entirely on the anvil that held the enemy still.
It absolutely did. And this is where the sources really highlight Eugene's brilliance and, frankly, his sacrifice. His forces weren't just standing there. They were launching these strong, really costly holding attacks.
Against difficult terrain, too, and a numerically superior opponent.
Exactly.
But wasn't that a huge gamble strategically? I mean, if Eugene is just focused on engagement, not a breakthrough, he could just get routed.
Oh, it was a massive gamble.
Couldn't the Elector of Bavaria have realized, hey, this guy's just holding us here, and then detach cavalry to swing across and smash Marlborough while he's exposed, crossing the river?
That is the core vulnerability of the entire plan. It really underscores the absolute trust these two commanders had to have in each other.
Because Eugene's troops took a beating.
A terrible beating. They faced heavy resistance, multiple counterattacks, and suffered really significant casualties. Some sources suggest his forces took the highest proportion of losses that day.
That sounds brutal. So they're basically taking this sustained, punishing barrage, knowing their success isn't measured in ground gained.
No.
But in the psychological distraction they're creating, they had to fight hard enough to be convincing.
Precisely. They bought Marlborough the time and the space he needed. Their success was entirely about preventing the Elector and Marsin from helping Tallard. They basically split the Franco-Bavarian army in half.
Creating the precondition for Marlborough's main attack.
Yes. Eugene was the strategic distraction, the anchor in the storm, providing the shield that allowed Marlborough to launch his missile.
And that brings us right to the moment where the synergy becomes reality. Timing. You can have the best plan in the world, but if the two parts aren't synchronized...
It all falls apart into two separate defeats. Yeah.
So how did they manage it?
Timing was paramount. And it really speaks volumes about their communication. Marlborough didn't just attack when the clock hit a certain hour. He explicitly waited.
He waited for a signal.
He waited for concrete confirmation signals, dispatches, you name it, that Eugene's troops were not just deployed, but thoroughly engaged. Engaged enough to pin the enemy on that right flank irrevocably.
So it wasn't just, okay, Eugene's ready. It was, Eugene is fully committed, he's taking losses, and now the enemy cannot look away. Okay, now we move.
That's it, exactly.
So what did that final maneuver look like when Marlborough launched it across the Nebel?
Well, first, it was a logistical nightmare. Just getting across that river. This wasn't some pristine little stream.
It was marshy, right?
Very marshy banks. The crossing points were contested by French skirmishers, and the whole area was exposed to artillery fire. It was incredibly slow going.
And all that chaos must have disrupted their lines, made them vulnerable. How did Marlborough maintain enough striking power to break the center right after that?
That's where his formation was so unique. Once they were across the river, he reordered his forces. He launched the attack using this very specific formation.
Okay.
2 lines of infantry in the center, but flanked by these powerful, heavy cavalry units. So think of it less like a wide wave and more like a fast-moving armored spearhead.
A spearhead designed to pierce.
Exactly. The infantry takes the initial shock, holds the line steady, while the cavalry, once they punch past that initial screen, are just free to exploit the gaps.
And this allowed him to deliver that maximum shock to the French center.
Which, and this is critical, was already weakened. Marshal Tallard had made a huge mistake.
He'd stripped his own center to reinforce the troops he'd packed into the village of Blenheim.
Yes. He focused all his attention on securing that village, assuming his flank commanders would, handle the rest.
He was counting on reinforcement.
That never arrived.
Because Eugene was holding them captive.
Once Marlborough's cavalry charge fractured that French center, the final horrifying step for them was the complete envelopment of Tallard's forces in Blenheim village. It led to their mass surrender.
And this is where the synergy is just undeniable. The victory wasn't delivered by one man. It was 2 generals acting as a single, perfectly balanced killing mechanism.
That's the perfect way to put it. The combined pressure is what led directly to the rout. You had pressure point 1, Eugene holding the enemy right, making any shift impossible.
And then pressure point 2, Marlborough attacking with the bulk of the army into a center that was already stressed and poorly defended.
And completely unable to draw reserves from anywhere else.
So the Franco-Bavarian command was just strategically impotent. They had 2 huge crises happening at once, but they couldn't shift resources between them.
Correct. They were forced to just watch the battle unfold in these isolated, losing sectors. The result was the definitive splitting of their army, the collapse of their line, and, the strategic victory that reshaped the entire war.
Just a remarkable case study.
It is. The genius of Blenheim wasn't just the final attack. It was the meticulous prep and the mutual support that made the French vulnerable to begin with. They didn't just share an objective, they shared a strategy with these specialized complementary missions.
The fixing mission and the striking mission.
Exactly.
So, to summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive, the coordination at Blenheim was defined by really 2 big components. First, that crucial pre-battle agreement to divide the field into sectors.
Marlborough on the offensive strike, Eugene on the defensive hold.
And second, the successful and very costly execution of Eugene's holding action. That action was the critical, high-risk precondition that let Marlborough's offensive succeed.
Without Eugene's sacrifice, Marlborough's advance across the Nebel would have been an exposed disaster. There's no other way to see it.
It required immense discipline and, more than anything, just complete faith in the partnership. Marlborough had to trust that Eugene would hold no matter what.
And Eugene had to trust that his grueling sacrifice was enabling a larger victory that he couldn't even see from his position.
It's incredible.
And that really raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. Something that goes far beyond an 18th century battlefield. When you have any complex operation, a military campaign, a corporate merger, whatever it is, that requires dividing command into specialized roles, one focused on endurance, the other on a breakthrough. What level of complete faith must a leader have in their partner's ability to withstand that immense pressure, to fulfill their task, even when the benefit isn't immediately visible to everyone else?
That's a great point.
The victory at Blenheim suggests that success doesn't always come from having the single strongest leader. Sometimes it comes from having the most trusting and strategically balanced partnership. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping on our boots and marching straight into 1704.
We are.
But we're not here to count the dead or, map out the cavalry charges. We're diving into one of the most consequential battles of the early 18th century, the Battle of Blenheim, and asking a much more fundamental question.
Which is?
What were the immediate political consequences? We're talking about the lightning-fast domino effect the single victory caused, not just across Europe, but right in the heart of England's government.
And that's really the core of the mission. We're looking beyond the muskets to the treaties, to the political realignments.
Exactly.
Blenheim wasn't just a win. It was a desperate, massive gamble by the Duke of Marlborough that instantly and decisively checked the ambitions of Louis XIV. For you, the takeaway here is understanding how one morning of fighting fundamentally reshaped the trajectory of the entire War of the Spanish Succession.
Overnight, really.
Pretty much overnight.
And the stakes, they couldn't have been higher when that battle kicked off in August 1704. If you want one fact to anchor this entire discussion, it's this: Blenheim saved Vienna.
Absolutely. We have to set the context here, and the context is desperation. Louis XIV, goal, the grand strategy of the Franco-Bavarian forces, was to march deep into the Holy Roman Empire,
seize the capital,
seize Vienna, and force the Emperor Leopold I to sue for peace. Had that happened, the entire Grand Alliance, this coalition built to stop the Bourbons from dominating Europe, it would have collapsed.
Just like that.
Just like that. Marlborough's audacious secret march across Europe was undertaken purely to prevent that immediate political catastrophe.
So the victory is secured, the French forces are routed. Okay, let's unpack the immediate fallout. Setting aside the thousands of prisoners, what was the most instant, tangible, political, and strategic gain that the Allies secured right after Blenheim?
Well, the most direct measurable gain was the immediate removal of an entire hostile state from the war.
You mean Bavaria?
Bavaria was knocked out of the conflict, plain and simple. This wasn't a gradual process of attrition. It was an instantaneous knockout blow. And it was followed by a very swift political settlement that just neutered a critical French ally.
And Bavaria was essential to the French plan, wasn't it? It was their gateway, their local support for that march on Vienna.
Precisely. When they fell, that whole line of attack it ceased to exist.
And there was a formal mechanism for this.
Oh, yes. The political mechanism that solidified this was the signing of the Treaty of Elbersheim. This happened remarkably quickly by November 1704, so just a few months after the battle. The treaty formalized Bavaria's withdrawal, dissolved their army, and placed the entire state under Allied military administration.
And you can see how strategically focused the Allies were. They wasted zero time securing the ground, ensuring no future threat could emerge from there. We're talking about the rapid Allied occupation of key cities. What were they? Munich, Augsburg,
Ingolstadt, and Ulm. And these weren't just symbols. They were strategic fortresses.
So they turned Bavaria from an active enemy front into what? An Allied supply base.
An Allied logistical supply base, exactly. But the impact goes far, far beyond territory. This victory delivered a profound psychological and military shift that had been, building for decades. Blenheim shattered the long-held myth of French military invincibility.
That's fascinating. You have to remember, France, under Louis XIV, the Sun King, had been the undisputed superpower of Europe for half a century. Their military machine was considered untouchable.
It was. So what was the reaction like when word spread that they had suffered a defeat of this scale?
It must have been seismic.
It was. For decades, facing the French meant certain defeat or, at best, a really costly stalemate. Blenheim proved definitively that the French army could be beaten, and beaten decisively in a pitched battle.
And that must have sent a shockwave of confidence through the alliance.
A shockwave that restored confidence across the entire Grand Alliance in Vienna, in The Hague, and perhaps most importantly in London. The Allies finally believed total victory was actually achievable.
And that confidence wasn't just, an abstract feeling. It strengthened the reality of coalition warfare. It secured the continued and extremely effective partnership between the two military giants of the Allied command,
Marlborough and Prince Eugene of Savoy.
That partnership was the engine of the alliance. And Blenheim proved that their combined strategy worked spectacularly.
That is the essential political outcome of the military victory.
Yeah.
Securing leadership. If Blenheim had been a failure, the Allies would have fragmented. Marlborough would have been politically destroyed back home.
And that collaboration with Eugene would have been impossible.
Impossible to sustain. Instead, it gave them license to dictate strategy for years to come.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, and frankly, a bit paradoxical. We're talking about a battle fought hundreds of miles away, yet it instantly triggered this massive political earthquake back in Great Britain. How? How did a foreign victory translate so immediately into changing the balance of power at home?
It provided a massive, politically unassailable boost to Queen Anne's government. You see, before Blenheim, the government, a moderate Tory ministry, was constantly under fire.
Why? What was the criticism?
The strategy of waging a costly continental land war, far from home, was deeply unpopular with many backbenchers. Critics, especially the hardline high church Tories, argued Britain should just focus on naval warfare and imperial expansion, not European land battles.
So the victory provided the political justification they desperately needed.
Exactly. Blenheim silenced those critics instantly. The cost, the gamble, it was all forgotten in the glory of saving Europe. But here's the paradox you mentioned.
Right.
The success, while strengthening the ministry, simultaneously exposed a deep political dependence. To prosecute the war effectively, to fund those massive armies and sustain future campaigns, they needed enormous amounts of money and consistent parliamentary support.
And that funding relied heavily on cooperation with the opposition Whig Party.
Yes. So the very victory that secured the moderate Tories' reputation forced them to empower their political rivals. It's a staggering change.
Yeah, it is.
It fundamentally altered the internal balance of forces. The government's natural base were those high church Tories, a deeply conservative group who were suspicious of continental alliances and disliked the financial mechanisms, like the Bank of England, that funded the war.
That they needed the money.
They absolutely needed the money. The needs of the war effort meant the ministry had to rely on the Whig Party, who were strong advocates of the war, and, well, they were masters of the complex financing required.
So in essence, the government was forced to move away from its core supporters and toward a coalition that relied on Whig backing. The requirements of victory dictated internal politics.
It's one of the great historical examples of national security strategy redefining domestic political identity. The moderate Tories had to choose ideological purity and losing the war, or compromising with the Whigs and securing the victory.
And they chose the latter.
They chose the latter, creating what historians call the Whig-junto period of increasing collaboration, which would define the next decade of British politics.
And we can actually point to a specific immediate legislative action that shows this newfound confidence at home, right? This Blenheim glow.
We can. With the ministry politically secure, they felt empowered to take a much tougher stance on Scottish issues, which was a pressing domestic crisis at the time.
And that confidence allowed them to push through the Alien Act of 1705. Now, for you, the importance of the Alien Act is that it was a direct political pressure tactic.
A pressure tactic to force Scotland to negotiate for a union with England.
And how harsh was this pressure?
Extremely harsh. The act threatened to classify Scots as foreign nationals in England, which would have essentially crippled Scotland's entire economy by cutting off trade and confiscating property.
Wow.
The political message was crystal clear. Celebrate our victory, or we will use our renewed political power to force you into a union. The ripple effect of a battle in Bavaria goes all the way to securing the future unity of Great Britain.
So we've covered the immediate local impacts, saving Vienna and knocking out Bavaria, and the seismic domestic shift in England. Let's broaden the scope once more. What does this all mean for the wider European map and the future of the war itself?
The continental consequences were monumental. The battle decisively checked Louis XIV's expansionist ambitions. Up until Blenheim, French power projection was continuous, aggressive, and largely successful.
And this just stopped it.
This single defeat halted French expansion cold and ended any immediate prospect of French hegemony over Europe.
And crucially, it shifted momentum entirely. The Allies were finally able to pivot from defense to offense.
Yes.
So not only did Blenheim secure Austria's shaky position and save the emperor, but it prepared the way for the Allies to abandon border defense and take the fight to France. Suddenly, they weren't just defending the Rhine, they were contemplating an actual invasion into France itself.
This shift marked the true turning point of the war. But we have to note the strategic implication. While Blenheim was decisive, it meant prolonging the wider war of the Spanish succession.
Because Louis wasn't defeated, just checked.
Exactly. But from France's perspective, the defeat was profoundly demoralizing. It severely impacted their military and financial strategy, forced them into heavily defensive positions in the following years, and irreparably weakened their negotiating hand in all future diplomatic talks.
So if we synthesize all of that, the political pivot points delivered by Blenheim are clear and immediate. Securing the Grand Alliance's survival, shifting political power within England toward a stable, pro-war coalition, knocking a critical state Bavaria out of the conflict.
And finally, setting the stage for the Allied advance that would continue the campaign for the next decade.
It truly was a political pivot point disguised as a military victory. It's amazing to reflect on how one triumph wasn't just military, but a fundamental, immediate political realignment that impacted everything from Vienna's safety to the future relationship between England and Scotland.
It's rare to find a single event with such instantaneous, multifaceted consequences.
Across so many different spheres of power.
And that leads us to a crucial lingering thought for you to consider, which is based on the deeper implications of that English political crisis.
Okay.
The sheer scale of the shift in English domestic politics, where the government willingly moved away from its traditional core ideological base, the High Church Tories, just to sustain a necessary war effort. That raises an important question. What happens to party loyalty and even party identity when the demands of external national security strategy require you to embrace your opposition? The necessity of fighting the war successfully forced a political transformation that was arguably as important to the future of Britain as the victory of Blenheim was to the future of Europe.